Hercule Poirot, and the letter that whispers death. Welcome, dear friends, to Warm Pages. I'm Sam, your host. Are you already counting down the days until Christmas and the New Year? Or do you find your heart still lingering in the gentle warmth of summer? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, so our cozy little community can continue to grow. Now, settle in perhaps with a cup of something warm as we begin tonight's mystery. Chapter 1. Shadows in the Morning Light. The morning light fell across Hercule Poirot's breakfast table with the discipline of a well-trained servant. Every spoon and napkin sat precisely aligned, the silver catching a muted gleam from the tall window. Steam curled from the delicate pot of chocolate, the scent of roasted beans and toast mingling with the faint polish of beeswax. It was a morning of order, calm, and the comfortable solitude he prized. George, his unflappable valet, entered with the post upon a tray. "Only one letter today, sir," he announced. Poirot glanced up, approving of the economy. He disliked excess, even in correspondence. But the envelope was curious. Heavy paper, edges hand-cut, sealed with black wax pressed into an unfamiliar crest. The sight of it, so dark against the white linen, unsettled the perfection of the table. He turned it over, studying the stamp. Belgian. A whisper of home, yet not a friendly one. "Strange," he murmured. "In summer, one does not use black wax, unless the message itself is in mourning." George tilted his head, uncertain if a reply was required. Poirot smiled faintly. "It is nothing, mon ami. Perhaps a banker has died." With delicate precision he slit the seal. The paper gave a reluctant sigh. Inside lay only a single folded sheet, its handwriting graceful but trembling, as though written by a hand both elegant and afraid. He read the words once, then again. "Do not forget what was promised. Death remembers." The phrase lingered in the air, soft as breath. Poirot's brow furrowed. The letters seemed almost to shimmer, each curve filled with the scent of violets and something damp, mineral, like old stone. He lifted the page closer to the light, noticing the faint watermark of a Brussels stationer long out of business. "Ah," he said quietly, "how curious indeed." For a moment he considered setting it aside, surely the fancy of some mischief-maker, but the clock on the mantel ticked a fraction too loud, and the calm rhythm of his morning felt ever so slightly disturbed. He folded the note, placed it beside his egg, and smiled to himself. "We shall see, mon cher Georges," he murmured, "whether death truly remembers." 400 words. The London morning unfolded with perfect precision inside Hercule Poirot's apartment. Pale sunlight lay neatly across the breakfast table, glinting off polished silver. The detective sat upright in his dressing gown, savouring a perfectly boiled egg, a curl of steam rising from his cup of chocolate. Everything obeyed its rightful place, the napkin's edge aligned with the plate, the chair drawn just so, the morning calm unbroken. George, his valet, entered soundlessly, a silver tray balanced in practised hands. "Only one letter today, sir." Poirot looked up. A single envelope lay on the tray, thick, cream paper, sealed with black wax, stamped in an unfamiliar crest. Its weight seemed out of proportion to its size. "One letter, and yet so dramatic," Poirot observed, lifting it with curiosity. "Who sends such things in summer, eh?" The postmark caught his eye. Belgian, his homeland. The smallest pause rippled his composure. He examined the seal more closely. "Black wax, George," he murmured, "belongs to funerals, not July sunshine." He smiled lightly, but his eyes did not. With careful fingers he cut the seal. The paper released a whisper. Inside lay a single folded page, ink faded slightly as if the writer's hand had trembled. The handwriting was beautiful, too elegant to be common, but unsteady, haunted. Poirot unfolded it fully. A single line stared back at him. "Do not forget what was promised. Death remembers." He read it twice. The words seemed to hum in the quiet room, as though someone had spoken them softly beside his ear. The faint scent of violets drifted from the page, violets and damp stone. He frowned. tracing the pen strokes with one fingertip. "Someone of refinement," he murmured. "But afraid." George waited by the door. "A jest, sir?" "Perhaps," Poirot said thoughtfully, "but jesters rarely use such fine paper." He folded the letter again, aligning the edges with care, and placed it beside his untouched toast. Outside, the city's noise stirred faintly, distant carriages on the street below. He felt an old restlessness, an echo of cases long resolved. The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice, a shade too loud. Poirot looked toward it, then smiled quietly. "We shall not disturb our breakfast for ghosts," he said. Yet the letter remained beside his plate, and every so often his eyes returned to it, as though waiting for it to whisper again. Poirot sat alone as twilight slipped through the lace curtains, the city beyond his window soft and gold. The letter lay before him on the polished desk, its black seal now broken, the paper faintly creased where his fingers had trembled, though he would never admit it. He turned it slowly beneath the lamplight, studying the strokes of the pen, elegant, controlled, yet trembling, as though the writer had fought against both fear and duty. Something stirred in his mind, a faint rustle in the archive of memory. There had been another letter once, written on a similar paper, scented faintly with violets. Belgium, before the war. A grey morning, a tearful governess, a promise made in the rain. He had solved the case, yes, but not the sorrow that lingered after. And the handwriting, mon Dieu, could it be the same? He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet hum of London beyond the glass. A carriage wheel echoed faintly in the distance, like the turning of time itself. Poirot reached for his pen, his mind steady once more. "Miss Lemon," he murmured aloud as he wrote, "find the postmark's origin. Seek discretion." The ink glided across the page, crisp and sure. Yet his reflection in the desk lamp looked oddly pale. Folding the letter neatly, Poirot slipped it beside the mysterious envelope. "There are memories," he said softly. "Even the mind of Hercule Poirot does not catalogue." He looked once more at the slanted script, at the trembling letters that seemed almost alive beneath the lamplight. "A promise made in the rain long ago," he whispered. Then, extinguishing the lamp, he sat for a moment longer in the half-dark, feeling the quiet breath of the past pressed gently at his shoulder. Chapter 2. The Manor of Whispering Pines. The village of Tremaux Hollow appeared out of the mist, like a memory returning too soon. The narrow road wound through sloping fields and over a small stone bridge where the water whispered softly beneath. The morning held that peculiar stillness of places untouched by hurry. Poirot sat upright in the hired motor car, gloved hands resting neatly on his cane, his gaze steady on the pale horizon. "England," he murmured, "has a genius for keeping its secrets tidy." The car turned through a rusted iron gate where moss had long replaced polish. Beyond it rose Tremaux Manor, half hidden by tall pines that whispered even without wind. The mist hung low as though listening. Windows peered through layers of grime like eyes reluctant to open. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and forgotten roses. It was not a place abandoned, Poirot thought, but one that had chosen to sleep. A woman waited by the steps, thin, upright, wrapped in a shawl of heavy wool. "Mrs. Vale?" she introduced herself, her voice courteous but guarded. "You'll be wanting the caretaker, sir, but I'm afraid that's me." Poirot inclined his head with gentle charm. "And I, madame, am an old friend of the house, though it does not yet remember me." He handed her his card. She glanced at it as if it might speak. "I was told you came about a letter," she said at last. "There's been none from here for years." Poirot followed her into the entrance hall where dust floated in pale light. Portraits lined the walls, faces with kind eyes but closed mouths. The floor creaked softly, answering every footstep. On a small table rested an envelope addressed in the same elegant hand that had disturbed his breakfast days before. Belgian paper. A faint scent of violets still lingered. Mrs. Vale shook her head. "It was left for the post, but no one signed it." Poirot's gaze drifted to the parlour. 2 teacups sat on a tray near the fire. One cup held the ghost of steam. He said nothing, only smiled and brushed a fingertip against the rim. "The manor," he said quietly, "breathes as if remembering." The afternoon light slipped through the torn lace curtains, soft and colourless. Poirot stood in the drawing-room of Trémaux Manor, his gloved hand resting on the back of a faded armchair. The air here felt layered, as though every breath disturbed something older, unseen. "Madame Vale," he said gently, "you maintain the house alone, yes?" Her hands, folded neatly in front of her apron, tightened just slightly. "It does not need much, monsieur. I come twice a week." "'Tis only a house now." "Ah," Poirot murmured. But even houses have memories. From somewhere above came a faint creak, the careful rhythm of footsteps pausing between boards. Poirot looked upward. Mrs. Vale did not. "The wind," she said too quickly. "Sometimes, monsieur, the house sighs." He smiled thinly, listening. Indeed, a most articulate wind. He moved through the corridor, tracing the walls with his eyes. The wallpaper, once cream and gold, bore faint indentations, as though something had leaned there often, listening from the other side. A mirror hung crooked, reflecting his own face beside a darker blur that vanished when he turned. There was perfume in the dust. Violets again, faint but deliberate. Poirot breathed it in and nodded to himself. In the study, the desk stood waiting, its drawers open like mouths mid-sentence. On the blotter lay a sheet of heavy paper, the ink dry but fresh enough to glisten faintly where the nib had pressed hardest. The same handwriting, slanted, beautiful, trembling. The letter began, "Monsieur Poirot, I have done what I promised, but it will not let me rest." The rest of the page was blank, the pen lying across it like a confession interrupted. Poirot's brow furrowed, the light catching the silver threads in his hair. He whispered, almost fondly, "So my correspondent hides in plain sight." A door clicked softly somewhere in the east wing, not slamming, not opening fully, just acknowledging him. The detective's gaze moved toward the sound. "Very well," he said under his breath. "Then we shall converse in the language of silence." Outside, the pines rustled as if in answer, their whisper, low and knowing. Chapter 3. The Woman by the Lake. The lake lay still beneath a gauze of morning mist, its surface smooth as glass. Poirot walked slowly along the bank, his cane pressing small circles into the damp earth. The air smelled of pine and something faintly floral, a sweetness that did not belong to nature. He paused, lifting his head toward the soft sound of footsteps behind him. She emerged from the pale fog like a thought recalled from long ago, a woman clothed entirely in grey. Her veil was thin, her movements serene, as though time itself gave her space to pass. She moved like a memory-given form. "Good morning," Poirot said with quiet courtesy. "A fine day for reflection, though the sun hides shyly, yes?" The woman smiled, a small, distant curve of the lips. "We take what light the lake gives, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head. "Ah, so you know me. Everyone in Trémaux Hollow does, I think. I am Miss Arden. I tend to the village archives. An admirable occupation. History must be handled with care, and gloves, perhaps." She looked down, startled by his glance at her hands. The grey gloves were indeed marked, faint violet smudges, almost invisible except where the mist dampened them darker. "A stain from ink," she said smoothly. "The old papers are unkind to clean linen." "Of course," he said, though his gaze lingered. "You have visited the manor?" Her composure faltered a breath. "Long ago. It was once a fine house, indeed," Poirot murmured. "And yet it breathes still." For a heartbeat she said nothing. Then she gathered her shawl and inclined her head. "Good morning, monsieur." He watched her step lightly away along the edge of the lake. The mist closed around her, and within moments she was no more than a shifting silhouette. Poirot approached where she had walked, the soft soil preserving each print like a confession. They led toward the reeds, and then, as if the earth itself had drawn a curtain, they vanished. A widow who never married, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing toward the still water.
How curious! The lake gave no answer.
Only the faint ripple of mist remained, trembling where she had stood. The inn at Tremo Hollow was a comfort of worn oak and low beams, its air fragrant with tea leaves and toasted bread. Poirot sat near the window, his cup steaming gently, the saucer immaculate, until the murmurs began to rise. Villagers, as he well knew, possessed a unique gift for conversation disguised as coincidence. At one table, two women bent their heads close over their knitting. The manor, one whispered, stood empty these 20 years. Yet the lamps glow some nights. Bah, said the other. The lamps, the letters, all nonsense. Though, her voice lowered further, old Mr. Tremo's daughter, but she was never found. Some say she took a different name. Poirot stirred his tea, a faint smile beneath his moustache. In every village, he murmured, the truth walks slower than gossip. The innkeeper's wife arrived with a tray of scones.
Careful, sir, she said softly.
We talk too much here. Everyone knows who sent the letter, except the one who received it. Poirot raised an eyebrow.
Ah, but that is often the case, madame.
Those who speak least know most. Her eyes flickered, wary yet curious, and she departed before he could inquire further. The door creaked as another entered. The postmaster, small and round, cap tucked beneath one arm. He exchanged greetings, then pretended to adjust the sugar bowl. As he did, a corner of folded paper slipped neatly beneath Poirot's saucer. Not a word was spoken. Poirot continued his tea, unhurried, allowing the moment to breathe. Outside, a cart rumbled past, scattering a few stray pine needles across the window pane. Only when he was certain no one watched did he lift the saucer. The message, written in a cramped, nervous hand, contained but one line. You are not the first to receive the letter. He read it twice, the steam from his tea curling through the words. Then carefully he folded it back and tucked it into his pocket. No, he whispered to himself. Of course not. But perhaps I shall be the last. The inn's clock chimed softly, and the murmurs resumed, as though nothing at all had happened. Chapter 4. Ink that bleeds memory. The evening deepened like spilled ink over the village, soft and deliberate. Lamps flickered in the narrow lanes, and the scent of rain lingered above the cobbles. Poirot sat by the window of his small inn chamber, aligning his cufflinks with mechanical precision, when a timid knock broke the rhythm. The door opened to reveal the postmaster, hat clutched to his chest. "Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly. It came just now. Same hand as before. He placed an envelope on the desk, thick, ivory paper, the seal again pressed in black wax. Poirot thanked him with a nod, and when the man left, the silence closed in like soft fabric. He studied the letter. The handwriting trembled more this time, each curve slightly uneven, as though written by someone whose hand was both familiar and frightened. The faintest aroma of violets drifted upward, blending with the candle's smoke. With his small silver knife, Poirot broke the seal. Inside was not a letter, but a photograph. The lake by the manor, its surface dulled by dusk. Across the margin a single line was written in that same fragile script. It is beneath. Poirot leaned closer, his brow furrowing. Beneath what? Beneath whom? The question hovered like mist over still water. He traced the photograph's edges, then noticed, in the reflection of the lake, a faint figure, blurred, but standing precisely where Miss Arden had lingered that morning. The detective exhaled slowly, setting the photo beside the first letter. The two pieces now formed a conversation, one written in words, the other in silence. He looked toward the dark window. Outside, the pines swayed with almost human rhythm. One cannot kill a promise, he murmured, nor the memory that binds it. The candle guttered, then steadied. Poirot's gaze remained fixed upon the image, its stillness suddenly alive with meaning. Somewhere, out near that lake, a truth was waiting, buried not only in the earth, but in the hearts of those who feared to speak it. The hour slipped quietly toward night. Poirot rose, adjusted his tie, and whispered, "Tomorrow we dig beneath." The night pressed softly upon Tremo Hollow, its silence stitched with the rustle of pine needles and the distant croak of unseen birds. Poirot moved along the narrow path toward the lake, his lantern swinging gently, casting gold upon the mist. Each step sank slightly into the damp earth, and the air smelled of moss and forgotten rain. The lake lay before him, perfectly still, a mirror holding the moon. He paused, gazing at the reflection of the manor across the water. It appeared less a house now and more a shadow remembering itself. The photograph's message echoed in his mind. "It is beneath." Kneeling by the edge, Poirot examined the ground. The soil was too recently disturbed, darker, softer beneath his fingertips. His lantern caught upon a stone half buried in the mud, smoothed by time but faintly moved aside. With deliberate care, he brushed away the earth until the shape of a small box emerged. Wrapped in oilcloth, its corners worn and frayed, he lifted it, feeling its weight, too light for what his imagination suggested. The clasp yielded with a sigh, and inside he found a broken locket, its chain tangled, the image within long faded. Beneath it lay a folded paper, the ink faint but unmistakable, the same handwriting that had summoned him here. He unfolded it under the lantern's glow. No threats, no plea.
Only a few quiet lines. "Forgive me. I could not keep the promise. I loved her still."
There was no signature, only the scent of violets grown faint with years. Poirot's hand lingered on the paper. "Every grave," he murmured, "has two secrets, what it hides and who placed it." He closed the box gently, returning his gaze to the lake. The moon's reflection quivered as if something unseen moved beneath its surface.
A ripple reached the shore, breaking the illusion for just a moment.
Poirot straightened, his expression unreadable, his thoughts quiet but relentless. Some promises, he knew, did not end with death. They lingered in places where silence grew thick. The detective turned back toward the path, the lantern light flickering across the trees, leading him once more into the waiting dark. Chapter 5. Candlelight in the Hall. The drawing-room of Tremo Manor glowed softly beneath the shimmer of candlelight, its air perfumed by tea and faint dust. Poirot, ever immaculate, presided at the small round table near the hearth, where three guests sat like chess pieces awaiting their turn. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, straight-backed and pale; the postmaster, uneasy yet eager to please; and Miss Arden, composed in grey once more, her gloved hands folded over her lap. Outside, the evening pressed its ear to the windows, listening. Poirot poured the tea himself, a gesture both hostly and strategic. "The English custom of tea," he began lightly, "is a ceremony most admirable for observing human nature. One sees who takes too much sugar, who stirs too fast, who waits for another to drink first." His eyes drifted over the cups like a cat surveying motionless birds. Small laughter rippled, though thinly. "Tell me," Poirot continued, "does anyone here recall a promise made long ago, keen one unkept, perhaps, yet never forgotten?" The word hung in the air. Miss Arden's spoon clinked softly against porcelain. Her hand trembled just enough to be seen by a man trained to notice tremors of the soul. Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes to the rug, studying its faded roses. The postmaster coughed, once, politely, then again, as though to fill the silence. In silence, Poirot murmured, "Truth often coughs before it speaks." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Someone among us," he said, "has written letters.
Not to wound, not to accuse, but to remind."
Such actions are born from devotion, not malice." Miss Arden's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Poirot's gaze softened. "There was love once," he said, "and a death unacknowledged. A promise that became heavier with time until it whispered itself back into the world." The clock on the mantel ticked in perfect rhythm, each second a heartbeat. Poirot allowed the silence to bloom. No one spoke. Yet, in perfect symmetry, All three turned their eyes, almost unwillingly, toward the same vacant chair at the table. Poirot followed their gaze, his expression unreadable. "Ah," he said quietly, "so we are four, and yet not alone." The candles had burned lower, their flames drawn thin as threads. The air in the drawing-room seemed to lean inward, holding its breath. Poirot remained still, hands folded neatly before him. Across the table, Miss Arden's grey eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too long a burden made of silence. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a sigh. "It was I, monsieur. I wrote the letters." Mrs. Vale's teacup halted mid-air. The postmaster's mouth opened, then closed again. Poirot inclined his head slightly as though the confession had already been known to him, merely waiting to be spoken aloud. Miss Arden's gaze drifted to the window.
"I did not write to you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly.
"I wrote to myself, to remember.
To keep the past alive so it might finally stop haunting me." Her words trembled like candlelight.
Years ago I was governess to the Trémaux child, Elise, the sweetest creature, curious and bright. One evening during a storm she went to the lake to retrieve something I had dropped.
I told her I would come after her.
But I did not.
I was afraid.
The water took her before I reached the shore. Mrs. Vale pressed a hand to her lips. Poirot's eyes softened.
"And you were blamed?" "No one spoke of blame," Miss Arden whispered, "but silence."
"Silence accuses more deeply than words ever can."
"I changed my name."
I returned years later, thinking time might absolve me. Instead, I began to write. The first letter to the woman I once was, the next to the one I might have been. Each one sealed as if sent from the grave I could never visit. Poirot nodded slowly. She had written to herself to keep the past alive, he thought. Then aloud, with quiet compassion, "The dead do not whisper, mademoiselle. Guilt does."
"And guilt, you see, is merely love that has lost its way." Miss Arden closed her eyes.
Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines, releasing a long, weary sigh, as though the house itself had forgiven her. Chapter 6. Truth Rearranged. The hour had deepened to velvet darkness. The candles guttered low, their light trembling like reluctant confessions. Miss Arden sat motionless, her grey attire blending with shadow. Poirot's gaze lingered on the stack of letters before him, their paper yellowed, their ink fading like voices from another time. He turned one over delicately. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "your letters continued after you ceased writing them." Miss Arden looked up, startled. I wrote no more after that final confession," she whispered. Poirot inclined his head, his voice calm yet edged with curiosity.
"Indeed, yet these, my dear, are dated but a month ago."
"The same hand, the same scent of violets, but the paper is new, the ink fresh."
"A ghost cannot buy stationery, no?"
The postmaster shifted uneasily. His fingers worried the brim of his cap. Poirot's gaze turned upon him, kind but unyielding. "Perhaps, monsieur, you will assist me. These letters, they passed through your office?" The man swallowed hard.
"They did, sir. I
was paid to forward them."
No harm meant.
An envelope would arrive, addressed in a different hand, with a note of coin. "I was told it was for sentimental reasons. Nothing more." Poirot's moustache twitched thoughtfully.
"Ah, sentiment, and how often it conceals mischief." Miss Arden looked between them, bewildered.
"But who would send such things?"
"Who would reopen the wound?"
Poirot arranged the letters into a perfect line, his fingers aligning their corners. "Someone," he said quietly, "who wished to stir what had settled, either for conscience or for gain. Perhaps a person who knew of your past and sought to shape the story anew. The ghost, you see, was real. It simply had a pen." A hush fell over the room. The clock on the mantel began its slow ascent toward midnight. Each tick seemed louder than the last, echoing across the high ceiling, through the long corridors of Trémaux Manor. Poirot rose, his shadow joining the others on the wall. "The truth, mes amis," he said gently, "has the curious habit of writing itself twice, once in ink, once in intention." The final chime struck midnight. Truth, it seemed, had indeed come calling again. Morning light slipped through the tall windows of Tremont Manor, spilling across the long dining table where Poirot sat, quietly stirring his coffee. The storm that had rattled the pines through the night had passed, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt almost rehearsed. Mrs. Vale was setting out the china when the sound of a motor car broke the hush. Unfamiliar, brisk, too purposeful for this sleepy village. Moments later, a tall man in a grey overcoat stepped into the hall, brushing raindrops from his bowler hat.
Mr. Hercule Poirot?
He asked, with the clipped politeness of someone who preferred ledgers to conversation. I am Mr. Halcombe of Redfern and Coe solicitors.
I believe I may bring unexpected news. Poirot gestured to sit.
The man opened his case with a precise click, withdrawing a set of yellowed papers bound with a faded blue ribbon. A will, he announced, discovered only last week in our London offices, dated the 17th of May 1933, and signed, it appears, by one Lord Tremont himself, the sole beneficiary.
Miss Eleanor Arden. Mrs. Vale froze, the teacup in her hand trembling just slightly.
Miss Arden, pale but composed, folded her hands in her lap.
That is impossible, she whispered. I was but the governess. Yet the signature is clear, said Halcombe.
The estate was never transferred or simply left dormant. An inheritance delayed by death, perhaps. Poirot studied the document in silence. His eyes caught the familiar handwriting, a flourish, a curve identical to the letters that had haunted him. And you, Monsieur Halcombe? He asked softly. Who sent you this task? Halcombe hesitated. An anonymous envelope, sir. No return address. Only a note. Deliver before November ends. Poirot leaned back, thoughtful. Some fortunes, he murmured, prefer to wait for confession. Miss Arden rose, her expression unreadable. Beyond the windows, the lake shimmered beneath the pale sun, calm as though nothing in its depths had ever stirred. Poirot watched her go, sensing the last shadow of mystery slipping into morning light. The heart, he said quietly, turning once more toward the distant trees, when silence must sometimes write. Chapter 7. The Letter That Whispers. Death night had settled gently over Tremont Manor. The fire in the hearth burned low, its embers whispering against the silence. Poirot sat in the high-backed chair by the mantel, the final letter resting between his gloved fingers. Its paper was yellowed with age, the ink faint but legible, the scent of violet still clinging as though memory itself refused to fade. He unfolded it with care and began to read aloud, not to anyone present, but to the quiet room that seemed at last willing to listen. My dearest one, the letter began, I could not tell you then, for to speak would have destroyed what little peace remained. The child lives, not beneath the lake, as they say, but far from here, safe and hidden from the cruelty of tongues that love to wound. I bore the blame so that another might live free of it.
Do not seek me. I am content to vanish with the storm, Poirot.
The words trembled on his lips, not confession, but farewell. He looked toward the flickering firelight, its glow painting the old portraits on the wall, and felt the ache of time pressed within each syllable. If ever you read this, the letter continued, know that I forgave long before I was accused. It was never hatred that silenced me, only love without courage. Poirot's gaze softened. The rhythm of the flames mirrored his breath. Around him the air seemed to exhale, as though the house itself were released from its long vigil. He folded the letter gently and placed it upon the mantel. Her words, he murmured, were not confession. They were farewell. For a moment he sat in stillness, the faint ticking of the clock marking the quiet return of order. Then he closed his eyes.
It is finished, he whispered.
In the distance, beyond the window, the pines moved softly, not in mourning, but in peace. The letter that once whispered death now spoke only of grace and of a love that had waited patiently to be heard. Morning unfolded with the gentleness of a sigh. A pale mist lingered over Tremont Hollow, soft as breath upon the still surface of the lake. The pines stood motionless, their long shadows stretching toward the manor that had at last fallen silent. Poirot stepped outside, his shoes crunching lightly upon the damp gravel. The air smelled faintly of pine resin and thawing earth, the scent of endings and of beginnings quietly waiting. Miss Arden stood near the water's edge, wrapped in a grey shawl that caught the early light. She did not turn as Poirot approached. She simply gazed upon the reflection of the manor in the lake, where the ripples shimmered like unspoken forgiveness. Her face was calm, her eyes untroubled. Whatever weight she had carried through the years seemed at last to have been laid down. Poirot stopped beside her, hands clasped neatly behind his back. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was not emptiness but peace, the kind that follows truth once it has been gently set free. "In every solved mystery," Poirot said softly, "a little mystery must remain."
"It is the soul's way of remembering." Miss Arden turned to him then, a faint smile touching her lips.
"And sometimes," she said, "the heart forgives long before the mind understands." He inclined his head, a gesture both farewell and respect. Then, with quiet dignity, Poirot returned to his waiting car. The engine hummed softly as he drove down the winding lane, the mist parting before him like a curtain drawn back from a long-forgotten stage. Behind him, the pines stirred, a whisper, almost like a name carried on the morning wind. It wound through the branches and across the silver lake, neither mournful nor strange, but tender, like the closing line of a lullaby. Poirot did not look back. Yet a faint smile curved his lips as he murmured, "Order, even in the heart. Yes, that too must be restored." And as the car disappeared beyond the bend, Tremont Manor stood quiet once more, its story folded neatly into the stillness, a secret now at rest beneath the whispering pines. Weeks later, in his London apartment, Hercule Poirot sat once more at his immaculate breakfast table. The silver was polished to perfection, the coffee poured precisely to the same line within his porcelain cup. Outside, the city murmured awake. Carriages, footsteps, a faint bell somewhere in the fog. Everything, it seemed, had returned to order. And yet the detective's eyes lingered on a single envelope resting by his saucer. It was unsealed, bearing no postmark. Within, a simple note written in Miss Arden's hand. "The lake no longer whispers, monsieur. I thank you for listening." Poirot folded it gently, his fingertips resting for a moment upon the paper, as though feeling the pulse of something far older than mystery, the quiet heartbeat of forgiveness. He placed it in his drawer, beside a faded photograph and a single dried violet pressed flat between its pages. Miss Lemon entered, punctual as ever. "Another letter, monsieur?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, no. This one needs no reply." He turned his gaze toward the window, where the morning light slipped through the fog like a memory returning home. "You see, my dear Miss Lemon," he said, "some mysteries are written not to be solved, but to be heard." She nodded, uncertain, and withdrew silently, leaving Poirot to his thoughts. He reached for his cup, the steam curling upward in soft ribbons. Somewhere beyond the city, the wind shifted, a sound so faint it might have been nothing at all, or perhaps the echo of pines far away, sighing through another dawn. Poirot closed his eyes, content. The world, with all its small tragedies and tender secrets, seemed balanced once more. "In every life," he murmured, "there comes a letter that whispers, not of death, but of what must be remembered." And with that, Hercule Poirot, master of order and heart alike, took another sip of his coffee, perfectly timed, perfectly warm, as London continued to hum quietly beyond the glass, its mysteries, for now, at peace.